Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Buenas noches, damas y caballeros, chicos y chicas, niños de todas edades, y bienvenidos a el Karey Carbaugh podcast. Welcome to the Karey Carbaugh podcast. My name is Karey Carbaugh, and this is episode number 31 of the Karey Carbaugh podcast. For those of you that I don't know personally, you may have realized through these that I am a person with low vision. And in some of the podcasts, it becomes a little more obvious than others. I try not to make all of these about vision disability and low vision, but some of them, the topics do lend themselves to that. Tonight's topic is going to start out talking about low vision, but I hope that by the end you'll see the broader application. I titled this podcast, I forget how I actually worded it. Hold on. I just had a mind blank. Yeah, I forgot how I started it. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. Sorry about that. I had to look at my notes on my phone here because I just had a mind blank for a second there. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. What did I mean by that? Well, I've got a couple stories that I'm going to share with you. As I mentioned in the post, I thought about titling this podcast Storytime with Karey Carbaugh, but I decided that put yourself in someone else's shoes was a little better topic and kind of brings the point home that I really hope to address tonight. But I'm going to do that through telling a few stories. I've got 5 stories that I'm going to share. A couple of them may morph into some sub-stories. 4 of them are real examples. One of them is sort of a hypothetical example, but it's made up of pieces of real stories from my own life. The story that sparked this podcast idea came from a friend of mine, and I did, right before this podcast, get permission to share this story. I'm glad she gave me permission because I was planning on sharing it in an anonymous fashion. But we were messaging about something else, and so I asked if they were okay with me sharing this. I'm still going to share it anonymously, but it is really the story that sparked the idea for this podcast. Many of my podcast ideas come from conversations and interactions that I have with friends or people that I follow online. Places like that. A lot of the podcast ideas I can't take credit for being original ideas. Some of them, like last week's podcast, came about because of the cool new Meta glasses that I got. And I do plan on doing some live demo videos of those, but I'm working out some tech issues right now. So fear not, that will be coming. But let's dive into tonight's podcast. Before we do, though, I would just like to ask you to let me know if you're watching this live or on the replay by dropping the word live or replay or an L or R in the comments. And throughout this podcast, if you're getting value, let me know that by dropping a V or the word value in the comments. This always helps me to know what topics are resonating with people. And whether people are catching this live or on the replay. Most people seem to be getting this on the replay, and I may start to look at adjusting the time a bit as we go into fall, but we'll look at that on another podcast. Let's dive into tonight before we get too far astray. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. The first story I want to share tonight came from a friend of mine, as I mentioned, who had an interaction, and I'm going to paraphrase this, with someone church, I believe it was, who couldn't understand why they were ignoring them. And when this was finally brought to my friend's attention, they explained that not only do they have low vision, but they are also hard of hearing. This is something that I did not know about this friend until fairly recently. It may have come about before they shared this story, but it hadn't really resonated with me until this story was shared. So not only does this person not see real well, but they also have a hard time hearing, which means that when this other person was trying to get their attention and trying to say hello or ask them a question, they truly did not recognize either visually or auditorily that they were being addressed. And my understanding is that this other person really took offense by the fact that they felt they were being ignored. And from my understanding, did not seem to really come around much when they found out that this person could neither see nor hear them clearly, and that they weren't intentionally ignoring the person. This is one example that I think we all can take note of and can take heed from to understand where the other person is coming from. Things are not always as they appear. And only through grace on each of our parts and patience can we really understand where the other person is coming from. And this leads me to a story in my own life which has a slightly different ending, actually quite a bit different ending, but is a very similar story. I had a neighbor, and I have to be careful here because they do follow these podcasts on occasion. I had a neighbor that several years ago we had never met before, and finally I was walking by the house and they spoke to me, and I introduced myself. They introduced themselves, and they said that they were pleasantly surprised that I had responded to them. And I was a little bit surprised myself, and I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I've waved to you a number of times and you just kind of walked on by. So I figured you had no real interest in being friendly or making friends with the neighbors. He said, I saw that you lived in the neighborhood and have waved to you several times when I've seen you walking past, but have gotten no response. And so this opened the door, and I explained to him that I'm a person with low vision and that I honestly did not see him wave to me. And his response was one of great compassion and great patience. He said, I'm very sorry. He said, I had no idea, which in a sense to me is a compliment because it shows that I've learned to overcome the difficulty to where a casual observer isn't necessarily going to notice anything wrong. That is both a positive and a negative. That has a double-edged sword to it because it means that people aren't necessarily going to know unless it's brought to their attention, and they may misinterpret if I don't see something or don't react when they wave. But on the other hand, it doesn't put me either positively or negatively on a pedestal or in a pity pot for someone else to pity every time they walk by me. So it is somewhat of a double-edged sword, but I'm happy to report that the ending to this story was very, very positive. We're very good friends now, very neighborly. I've gotten to know him and his wife and his two kids, and they've actually been very helpful on a number of occasions, especially the two boys. They helped shovel my walks a couple of years ago when I slipped and fell and broke my wrist. And the gentleman, the father of the family, he and I, as well as the kids too for that matter, but he and I have a number of very good in-depth conversations. I sometimes hope that his wife doesn't think that we're chatting for too long out in front and keeping him from what he's probably supposed to be doing. But at any rate, I think I have a fairly good relationship, friendship, neighborly relationship with his wife too. We've talked on a few occasions as well. So I'm happy to report that that story, because of his listening and compassion, had a much different ending than so far the first story that I shared. That story is much more recent, and so I'm hopeful that that will come to a similar type resolution and ending. Before I jump into the next story, once again, I'd like to encourage you, if you're finding value in these, if you're getting value from these stories, let me know that by dropping a V or the word value in the comments. That just helps me to know the engagement. And I need to pull up my notes here because I want to catch these stories in the order that I sort of laid them out. I want to make sure I don't skip anything or jump around too much. The next story that I wanted to hit here is one that I found. I can't remember now if it came to me in a message or whether I read it on a post online. It's someone that I know not real closely, but we've become acquaintances. They're also a person with low vision, and I believe they may have another disability, though I'm not positive on that. But they brought something up that I think fits right into this topic. If you think about yourself for a moment, presuming that most people that are watching this are people without a disability or an obvious difficulty. So put yourself for a moment in the position of preparing for a party. Maybe you're planning to fix a nice meal, or maybe for my guy friends who are not chefs like myself, maybe you're planning on serving alcohol, having an open bar, or maybe just planning on watching movies with popcorn and some snacks. At any rate, think of yourself in this situation where you're planning for a party or some guests to come over, and you realize after going to the store to get everything that you need. For this example, I'm going to use cooking because that was the example that this friend of mine online brought forth. And I don't remember for sure if this was what they were preparing or not, but let's just play along for the sake of the story. Let's say they were going to have a taco night, taco party. And they went to the store and picked up everything that they needed. And they got home and they were getting ready to sit down and fix their meal for the night. Again, put yourself in this scenario, whatever you're planning on. You've just come back from the store and you've laid out all your stuff to get ready for the evening event. And in the scenario of our taco bar, you realize that you've forgotten tortillas. Well, for most people, that's a bit of an inconvenience. Maybe you also forgot cheese. That's a bit of an inconvenience for most people, but in your scenario, let's say you've forgotten something, you can just jump in the car or walk down the street and pick up whatever you forgot at the local grocery store. Easy peasy, right? Might set you back 20, 30 minutes having to run to the store to pick it up. But let's say you've realized this a couple hours before your guests are going to arrive. Well, in the case of my friend, or in the case of myself, when we get to that point where we realize, oh shoot, I forgot to pick up tortillas, or I thought I had them in the shopping cart or in the bag and they're not there. For someone like us, this is quite a setback because now we either have to do DoorDash or something at a fairly significant added expense, or we have to jump in the bus. No problem, right? Except that in many places the buses only run once an hour. So you may have missed your bus. Now you got to run to the store. You got to pick up what you forgot, hop back on the bus, come back home. That could easily set you back 2 hours instead of the 30 minutes. So if you think about yourself, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, maybe they appear that they're disorganized, that they're forgetful, that they're not ready for the party when the guests arrive, where in reality, maybe what's happened is a small mishap cost them a couple hours of their prep time. Once again, a little grace and a little patience can go quite a long ways. You might say, well, why don't they just wait and ask one of their guests to go grab it when they get there? That could be a possibility, unless many of their guests maybe are also in a similar situation where they don't drive either. In which case, we're right back to square one. And so I bring this example up not as a woe is me or as a pity party, but rather as something to think about as you encounter people. Put yourself in their shoes and what they may have gone through that may appear one way, but really be something completely different. And that leads me into my next example, which again I want to look on my phone to make sure, because I've got two more and I want to make sure I share them in the right order. I'm often told that, again, appearing disorganized and not having time, not having good time management, people often say, well, why don't you make better use of your time on the bus? Make phone calls, make plans, read books, read emails, get caught up on that kind of stuff while you're on the bus. Well, that all sounds well and good, and some of that can work well, but I've tried that on occasion, and unlike someone who has full sight and can just glance up periodically to make sure that they know where they are, that they don't miss their stop, I've found myself on a number of occasions getting focused on what I'm working on and missing the bus stop. Best case scenario, that means a few blocks walk back. Not a huge deal. It might mean half a mile or a mile walk back, depending on the bus. Or, in one case, I was focused on doing something and missed the stop. The next bus stop was in downtown Denver, about 10 to 15 miles away. So then I had to figure out the next bus to come back to the stop that I missed getting off on, which cost me about a half hour to 45 minutes of my day to get back to that stop. Fortunately, I was going to arrive at my meeting for work a bit early, and so I just lost that extra time that I had planned on having to go through some emails and prepare for the meeting. But I still made it on time to the meeting. Once again, it may appear like poor time management. Not saying that I couldn't do better on managing time, but a lot of times what appears like poor time management is simply it takes longer to do things. And if someone who relies on public transportation forgets something and has to run back out and grab it, that could take a couple hours out of their day. That is really unproductive in any other way and not the kind of time that they can multitask, as many people do throughout their day. It's much more difficult to multitask when you're riding a bus. Think about it as you're driving a car. You don't want to be reading a book while you're driving a car, or you shouldn't be text messaging while you're driving a car. In most places, that's illegal. Similarly, on the bus, it's not illegal, but if you get too focused, you're going to miss your stop. And unlike a private car, on the bus, it's difficult to have phone conversations or Zoom meetings because there's a lot of other noise and activity, and you're going to disrupt other people that are on that bus. So once again, when you encounter someone who appears to be disheveled and disorganized, try to put yourself in their shoes and see maybe what they're going through and what they're coming through or coming from that causes their actions to appear the way that they do. This brings me to what I believe is my final story. This is a bit more of a hypothetical, but based on some real examples. Let's say, and this is the one that brings it full circle, not so much about a person with low vision. Let's say you encounter someone who is in a bad mood. You might simply brush it off and say, well, they're in a bad mood today. Or maybe you rub them the wrong way and say, why are you so grouchy today? Why are you so upset? You need to cheer up, be chipper. Unbeknownst to you, maybe they've just lost a pet. Maybe they've just lost a loved one. Maybe they are going through difficulties in a relationship and they haven't shared these details. But that can manifest itself in terms of a bad mood, in terms of abrupt or short tempers. And without the grace of people around them, this can escalate into a very poor situation, very poor encounter between the two individuals. But if one person, mainly the listener in this case, can show some grace and understanding, that can go a long way to helping the person who's had a bad day, who's having a rough day, to become grounded and to find themselves amidst the chaos going on in their life, just simply by someone that they encounter showing them a bit of patience and a bit of grace. That can be just enough to calm the chaos, if only for a moment, to help that person find their grounding and get their bearings back. And so I hope that makes sense. I wanted to at least include one example that wasn't entirely based on a difficulty or a disability, but something maybe more relatable to a broader audience. And once again, I do hope you've gotten value from these examples. I hope maybe you can see yourself in some of these, maybe on both sides of some of these, both the person having the difficulty or the person encountering the person with the difficulty. At any rate, in either case, I hope you've gotten value from this. If you have, let me know by dropping a value or a V in the comments. And let me know which one of these scenarios resonated with you the most. That's also helpful. As we bring this in for a landing, we've gone a little longer than I thought we would. I thought this would be a little shorter podcast. So I'm not going to try to respond to some of the comments. I do see that we've got a lot of comments coming in, and I do appreciate that. I will respond to those after the broadcast. I am going to start experimenting either with my meta glasses or some other ideas that I've got that will help to make it easier to respond to comments live as they're coming in. So that's an improvement I hope to bring to these podcasts in the very near future. If you have topics or questions that you'd like me to address on these, let me know that as well. If you don't feel comfortable putting those in the comments, you can always message me directly, preferably on Facebook. I do also check Instagram. Message me directly and let me know your questions or suggestions if you'd rather keep those more private. Also, if you'd like to be added to my email list, I'm starting to build an email list and am hoping to bring some more private events in the very near future. Would love to share those with you via email. You can either direct message me your email address or put the word email in the comments and I will reach out to you privately to get your email address. If you'd like to be added to that. I have a few people that I've started the list with and hope to start utilizing that list very soon. So once again, my name is Karey Carbaugh, and this has been the Karey Carbaugh Podcast, episode number 31. I'm not sure I said the episode number in the beginning. I can't believe we're on episode 31 already. But as always, I do appreciate everyone's support, and whether you're watching live or on the replay, thank you so much for your support and your continued encouragement of these podcasts. I never thought I would be doing podcasts, and here we are almost 7 months into them. So thank you so much. And for now, I will bid you a fond farewell, either a good night or a good day, depending on when you're watching this. And I would encourage you this week to do something positive for someone around you. Show them some grace, show them some patience, or do a kind deed for them. But make it a blessed day for yourself and for someone else. Until next time, have a blessed day, a blessed evening, and we will see you next week unless I pop in before then in the meantime. Have a blessed week, and good night for now. Bye-bye.